Hi everyone, this is Tori Vandeland with Prevent Connect. If you joined us on our recent web conference co-hosted by the Prevention Institute, you'll have noticed two things. One, the conversation our guests had and the stories they shared were amazing and so inspirational for advancing prevention. And two, we had some tech difficulties. We are so excited to re-release this web conference recording in 2 podcasts so our Prevent Connect audience can engage more with these conversations beyond our original web conference. On this podcast, Mai Bao Yang and Dee Lee share how their CHAN-BOF collaborative advances intimate partner violence prevention within Hmong communities.
So Dee works as a program specialist for CHAN-BOF for Peace Collaborative, which you're going to be learning all about, and has been organizing with Building Our Future since 2014. Dee is also the co-chair and co-founded Queer SUAB and facilitates LGBTQ 101 and allyship trainings. She has a background in data analysis, LGBTQIA+ organizing, and advocating for social justice. We also have Mai Bao, who started her career in the anti-gender-based violence movement 10 years ago as an advocate at Haven Women's Center. Her love for Hmong women and girls and her community led her to create California Hmong Advocates Network with other Hmong advocates in the Central Valley of California. She currently works as a program specialist for CHAN-BOF, organizing to create systematic changes in the Hmong community. And I just wanted to highlight, since I shared those 2 cohorts, to say that both Dee and Mai Bao are working together in the Leveraging Collaboration to End Domestic Violence cohort and really bring a lot of expertise from the gender-based violence prevention field. So Dee, can you start off by sharing a little bit about the collaborative that you formed and why you decided to come together?
I can start a little bit about explaining what CHAN represents and what BOF represents. So our collaborative is comprised of the 2 networks. They were separated. They started both in 2013. So CHAN represents the California Hmong Advocates Network, and they're a group of Hmong advocates in California, and they're all advocates in DV and SA organizations, providing direct services to their organizations, working to change community perspectives on advocates and the organizations that they work in, and move mainstream organizations to be more culturally responsive to Hmong survivors. So that's the CHAN part of it. The BOF part of it stands for Building Our Future, and this is a network of change agents in the Hmong community to address gender-based violence, particularly the issues of abusive international marriages, which we call AIM. And this term is coined by Wisconsin advocates when older Hmong men travel overseas to Laos, Thailand, Vietnam, and marry young girls and bring them back. Sometimes they bring them back, sometimes they don't. Bring them back to the U.S., I'm sorry. And so BOF's work is more focused on community mobilizing. So CHAN and BOF have worked together in the past, and it was our history because we're working together now to partner under Alliance for Community Transformation. And the goal is to explore culturally responsive ways to end gender-based violence in our Hmong communities. Our focus point now is Sacramento, Merced, and Fresno, and hopefully we can explore more because we know that there's a lot of Hmong folks also in, Marysville, Oroville up there, and also below as well in LA. So we recognize that advocates cannot address that gender-based violence alone, and in order for us to do this work, we need to generate system changes around oppressive cultural norms. And this work in our Hmong community needs to come together so that we can understand the root causes of gender-based violence. Because of this, our collaborative has passionate and dedicated people in different sectors in the community, and our need to form this collaborative is very important because we have a lot of high murder and murder-suicide rates in our community. And just to give like a frame of reference, from September to now, we have had 3 murder-suicides that have occurred, and then 1 murder of a Hmong woman by their male partners. So we know that murder is the ultimate form of violence in our community. So CHAN and BOF's goal is to have a conversation on the cultural practices and the systemic changes in our community around domestic violence and gender-based violence. So that's a little bit of what CHAN-BOF is.
Thanks, Dee. Yeah, 4 violent incidents in September is a lot, and I'm sure the community is grateful that your collaborative is coming around to try and achieve this goal that you've set for the collaborative and really get to the root of the problem. In forming this collaborative, what are some of your initial steps involved?
So what we understood from the beginning with our previous work, because we have a lot of folks in our collaborative who are DV survivors, but also advocates. And so we need to build a base of community members in community-based organizations for us to be able to move the community. So right now we don't have a formal process or a structure that we follow. It's more of doing what feels right and what will work for the community. So that our work enables and flows because we're responding to the needs and ideas of our partners, our community, and the work that it invokes. So what's the most important thing right now that we're building is relationship and trust. And we can't move towards change if we don't have these deep relationships with our partners and the community, because it's great work, but at the same time, DV is in our community is a very sensitive and controversial subject. The community would not take it well. So we have to establish the rapport and really dig in deep with the root causes and the risk factors in changing our cultural norms. So we started with 10 we grew from 10 people to 30 people, and that's our partnership right now. We're meeting every month and every other month, depending on the capacity of the region. And during our meetings, we build in time to get to know each other and talk about all the issues in our community, which we have a lot of issues, which, all communities do. And during the phase of our work, we are onboarding people and building our collaborative. We're building a shared language and understanding the framework of gender-based violence so that everyone is aware of the position that we stand on the subject. And we want to make sure our collaborative respects and values whole persons. We're survivor-centered. We want to assume best intentions and share decision-making. So that's our collaborative.
Thanks, Dee. That's helpful to get that context, and I like how you're being responsive to the community and doing what feels right. As leaders in the domestic violence field and trying to do collaborative work in a culturally sensitive way, as you're trying to do, what have been some of the challenges so far? And Mai Bao, I'll let you speak to this.
Yeah, so we actually have a lot of challenges, and the first one and the biggest challenge is that people tend to not want to talk about domestic violence. In the Hmong community, it has always been a very sensitive and controversial topic. And the Hmong language actually do not have a word for domestic violence. And in the past 25 years or so, that Hmong advocates have been doing intervention and prevention work. Advocates and survivors have coined the term "geiji thaw," to mean domestic violence. But in using this word, the original definition of it means to torture. And because this word is very loaded, many people use more sensitive words such as family problems or mutually don't get along to describe domestic violence. But these these words don't convey a survivor's feeling or experience of being oppressed or abused. And so that's why advocates, we use the term gay-seesaw. So, there's a balancing game that we have to play depending on where we are, who we're speaking to, who our audience is. We have to tailor our language to be more appropriate. And even then, even as we try to, change our language so that people are more receptive to that, there are many people who are still not open to talking about domestic violence. And because they don't want to talk about domestic violence, then we can't talk about the root causes of domestic violence. Another challenge is the commitment or capacity of individuals and organizations to be part of this movement in California. Even with incentives, because it may not be a priority matter for them, they don't commit, or they just don't have the capacity to commit. So, so right now, at first we were reaching out to organizations, but then that wasn't working for us. And so right now, rather than reaching out to orgs, we are concentrating on connecting to people in the community who have a passion to create change. And our hope is that once the people are committed, or as our movement grows, that the community-based organizations that these people work in, or other community-based organizations, will see our work, and then they will want to join in on the movement. And so with talking about, capacity and, individuals, it is easier for us to get the buy-in of domestic violence organizations to support their Hmong advocates who are interested in being a part of the movement because of the work that they do. It is clear that, what CHAN-BOF is doing aligns with, advocacy work. And so that is pretty easy, but trying to get, community-based organizations to understand how their role in the community can help this movement has been challenging. And then there is also a huge negative perception of advocates and domestic violence organizations. Even culturally specific, DV organizations, the community still has a negative perception. And so the Hmong community believes that advocates drive wedges in families and tear them apart. And DV shelters are known as Jangofa or Jbondal, which in translation would mean the house of runaway brides or the house for divorced women. And so previously, CHAN has done some work in addressing these perceptions, but there is still more work to be done. And although, our current project in leveraging collaborations to end domestic violence is more focused on, primary intervention work, because we are fiscally sponsored under an organization that houses 2 domestic violence programs, and of course, because we are addressing issues of gender-based violence and domestic violence, that the community still has that perception of us.
Thanks, Mai Bao. And I know that these are all challenges that your collaborative is, really trying to take on, and especially around, people's perception of the field or, needing shared language. I'm sure there's lots of ways that you're trying to now build that shared understanding about how domestic violence is really a community issue. Can you please share more about that? So yeah, Mai Bao, how else are you trying to build a shared understanding about domestic violence as a community issue?
Yeah, so we are currently in the planning phase of a qualitative community assessment with survivors. And what that means is it's just a fancy word for we're doing survivor interviews. The purpose of these interviews is to ask Hmong women survivors what they what their experiences were when they were in crisis with their husbands. Who supported them? How did these people support them? Who didn't support them, and what did these people do that were not supportive? And our goal is that we will analyze it, and then we will share our findings with the community. Right now, we don't know how we are going to deliver our analysis to the community, whether it will be, roundtable discussion or community forums. And so what we want to do is to uplift what was helpful to survivors and also discuss what was not helpful and how we can change our cultural norms or practices that have not been helpful to survivors. And another very important piece of how we are building an understanding of domestic violence is storytelling, using storytelling. So the Hmong culture or community has always carried an oral, storytelling tradition. Growing up, our parents would tell us stories of folklore or stories of our history, and so CHAN-BOF will use storytelling as a strategy to start the discussion around cultural norms and how they impact Hmong women and girls. And we are hoping that by sharing the findings of the community assessment through a more storytelling perspective, that it can persuade the community to look at root causes of, gender-based violence and generate change. And also, in order to end gender-based violence, we are digging, really deep into changing the hearts and minds in our community so that we all can value the lives and well-being of Hmong women and girls. And we know that when women and girls thrive in a community, then that means that the community thrives. So this is our hope. But since we are allowing or intentionally letting the survivor interview lead our work, everything may change direction once we analyze our finding. And so this is our thinking right now, but it could change come next year.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see how you're taking your experience and working with survivors and connecting it with prevention too. And, I think that could be healing for survivors to be part of this process too and really leading it. What are some practices or examples of cultural practices that might be contributing to a culture of violence in relationships in your community? And then also, we know that culture also supports safety. So what are some practices that contribute to safety as well?
So I think that one of the biggest things that is in the Hmong community is that patriarchy is a root cause of gender-based violence. And some examples that I want to give as in terms of patriarchy is that the women's spirituality is housed under their in-laws. So when they get married, her birth family relinquishes all responsibility of her physical and well-being to her in-laws. So if you get divorced or you pass away before another man houses you under your ancestors' protection, you become a homeless wandering ghost. And that has been a huge issue that has happened in the past. Another patriarchal cultural norm is bride price, which is a traditional practice of money exchange for a woman's hand in marriage. So although our elders say that the idea behind it is to show how much value a woman is because money is exchanged, abusive families will view it as a commodity instead of a human being. So someone can say, I paid for you, so I get to treat you however I want. Another patriarchal root cause is the value of boys over girls, which stems from the belief and practice that boys carry on traditional practices and family lineage the community does not see value in teaching girls traditional practice. So many of us do not know our rights we may have as women. Our elders say that there are protections for Hmong women when it comes to abuse, but many women are not aware of them. And the last patriarchal cultural norm I want to talk about is traditional gender roles and toxic masculinity. So there's the idea of CJ, which means upholding the ultimate authority in the home. So it's like male authority. C means male or men, and then or father, and then J means home. And then there's also the ownership of women. So husbands owning their wives, brothers having an authority over their sisters, especially when their father has passed away, and sons' ownership of widowed moms. So if the husband has or the father had passed away, the son steps up. And then another cultural norm we also want to address is the idea of 我先得, which means like be patient. So that's when a DV victim seeks help from their clan or elders for support. And most of the time, she is told to be patient and return home. And so when we talk about cultural norms, it's very important that we acknowledge the importance of our culture in our community and that we're not against the community or cultural practices, but rather the oppressive cultural practices. Hmong families differ from one another in their perspectives and our perspectives as well. So how we practice our culture, it may seem like we're generalizing, but we just want to paint a picture of how domestic violence shows up in our community.
Yeah, I think having those examples is really helpful to depict how these harmful gender norms play out, and then also recognizing that you're not against the culture or the community, and there's also positive aspects of it too. But how can we really change those oppressive cultural practices? So I know that you're in the early stages of the work that you're doing with your collaborative. But what are some of your ideas of how to change these deep-rooted cultural norms in the community that are oppressive?
Yeah, so our first step in changing these norms is to educate people on what gender-based violence is, especially from a survivor's perspective, and uplift their voices. Because many times as advocates, we use an advocate's voice to speak with the community. And so this time around, we are going to uplift the voices of survivors. And also, many in our community do not know what domestic violence is or think that domestic violence is just physical abuse when there is more to it than just physical abuse. And even survivors can't name what they're going through or don't really know what's happening to them. And sometimes abuse is so normalized that it just becomes a part of everyday life. And so when we have the language to identify what we are going through, then it'll be easier for us to have a conversation around gender-based violence. We are also not only using survivors' voices, but we are entertaining using the voices of our shamans and cultural experts. So, the traditional Hmong culture is very spiritual, and many respect the expertise of shamans and cultural experts. And shamans are, they're the mediators between the realm of the spiritual realm and the realm of the living. And so shamans help perform rituals such as soul calling ceremonies, and they heal a person spiritually when they're ill. Cultural experts are the people who have extensive education and knowledge on Hmong culture practices and rites. And They play the thing and the drums during a funeral. They are, they know how to chant funeral songs to send the deceased into the afterlife. They are the people who help parents negotiate a bride price during, a wedding. And as as a collective or as advocates, sometimes we wonder where our cultural norms come from. If we know where they come from, and if we know that we don't have to follow them because there was never really a reason why you practice them or they no longer make sense in today's world, then we can dig deep into addressing gender-based violence and let those oppressive cultural norms go. In fact, there are actually a number of shamans and cultural experts who have stated that some of our cultural norms and practices are oppressive to young women and girls, and that we need to shift and we need to look at the well-being of women and girls and change the way we do these practices. And so as a collective are addressing domestic violence or gender-based violence, it is very important, as Dee stated above or earlier, that it's very important that we don't neglect addressing toxic and hypermasculinity and misogyny, especially internalized misogyny within, in Hmong women. Because a lot of the times, although it is the Hmong men who have created these patriarchal practices, but it's really the Hmong women who perpetuate, and continue on this cycle of oppress. A lot of times you will hear, like, if a victim goes to her mother and she says, "I'm being abused," a lot of the times they will just tell her to be patient, and they will say, "I endured it with your father. And so you just need to be patient and endure it with your husband, and he'll change. When he gets older, he's going to get tired. He's no longer going to abuse you anymore, and then you'll be fine." And so these are, as we are addressing these issues, this is something that we want to focus on as well. And asking ourselves, how do we shift our community to support Hmong women and girls? And how do we shift the conversation of domestic violence from "she must have done something wrong to deserve that" to "he was not justified in abusing her or killing her. So how do we hold him accountable?" And, we know as advocates doing this work for some time, we know that we have to work with those in the community that have power to help us make these changes. And it will be challenging, because we will need to leave behind differences of opinion and come together with this idea that we want the well-being of Hmong women and girls to create a world where everyone thrives. So as we are trying to figure out, as our collective is trying to figure out what strategies work and how we can change our cultural norms, we will continue on having conversations with the community. And as we shape our ideas together, we hope that they'll trickle from individuals to family and then into the community.
Wow. Yeah. First off, just, thank you for again highlighting some of these deep-rooted cultural norms and how you're thinking about changing them and working with community leaders and, focusing on the accountability pieces as well. And all of this is really important for changing these deep-rooted norms. So thank you. Both of you, Dee and Mai Bao, for sharing about your exciting work, and we're looking forward to continuing learning as you move into the next phases of this work.